No show is complete nowadays without hearing from, across the pond, my dear colleague and wonderful up-and-coming broadcaster, and one day I predict a politician too. She's Rachel Blevins, remember her name. Rachel, welcome, so good to see you again. I'm sorry to go on about him, but I've just noticed that Melania Trump has started a new Twitter account, so she's not banned, even if her husband is. How long will it be before Donald is snatching the phone from her hand and tweeting in her name, I wonder? But speculation is mounting that the Orange Man is going to run again in 2024. What say you?
Yeah, the question seems to be not if he will run, but when he will announce that he's running. And it really is interesting to see, with this 2024 field, we've even got polls already saying that if it comes down to Trump and Biden once again, then Trump could take the win on that one. In terms of where social media is going to be in all of this, I think we're also going to have to ask ourselves the question of just how much the mainstream media and those big tech giants want to get out of this. Because when it comes to Donald Trump, no matter how offensive they claim that he is, the reality is that he makes them a lot of money and gets them a lot of traffic. So when it comes to, mainstream media networks like CNN and Fox News, they've seen their ratings struggle as a result of Trump not being in office, Trump not being on social media, them not getting to talk about him. And when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, they're really going to have to ask themselves the questions. And we could actually see some backpedaling. We know with Facebook, they haven't made their final decision just yet. And we could even see Twitter kind of backpedal just to say, hey, actually, maybe we shouldn't be banning the president or even past president of the United States from our platform.
Or future president, yeah. Because if he ever becomes president again, he might do something about us. But it's a strange situation where the Taliban have a blue tick Twitter account, but the president, as was and may be again, is still banned off Twitter. That's pretty bizarre, isn't it?
That it is. And I know it kind of brings up a lot of the complaints that there have been with these big tech giants like Facebook, like Twitter, the ones that, say that they need to go after certain political figures and they need to silence them. But at the same time, you ask yourself, whenever it comes to a lot of extremist content, or, you're thinking about like ISIS videos and that sort of things, those things that are shared on social media, they're being shared on Twitter and Facebook. And so it constantly begs the question of what they're really actually concerned about whenever they claim that they have to go above and beyond to silence certain political figures like Trump, like independent journalists, but at the same time, they don't actually go against the violent content that can be found all around on their platforms.
Now, not a crime, of course, although a crime by omission, perhaps, was the devastation caused in New York with the flooding last week. The infrastructure which is crumbling in the United States, as indeed it is here in Britain. We've got plenty of money for war, but not enough for the drains. How bad was it in New York, Rach?
It was pretty bad. I know there were a lot of videos going all around. There's likely millions of dollars in damage. And we have to remember that this stretch all the way from New York down to Louisiana, where there's still millions of people that are still struggling to gain access to power. And it hit Louisiana on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which was another devastating storm. And it does serve as a reminder that Congress really needs to get on it when it comes to infrastructure and actually focusing on this country, because the reality is that, yes, when it comes to Mother Nature, there's only so much you can do, right? We're going to expect hurricanes. And with the way that the United States is going, we're going to expect weather to get more and more drastic every single year. But when it comes to that all too important infrastructure, that doesn't really seem to be their focus at all, even though they claim, that they want to throw around billions of dollars in infrastructure spending. Well, at the same time, there's also a movement in Congress to increase the United States defense budget, to increase military spending by $24 billion next year. And the Biden administration didn't even ask for that. They wanted to keep it normal right around $715 billion for next year alone. But there's a movement largely of Democrats that is pushing to increase spending to $740 billion, all while they're sitting there claiming, hey, we ended the Afghanistan war, you would think that that would make spending go down a little bit, or that that would move the funds over towards things that the American people actually need to deal with. But no, instead, they just want more money all around, it seems like.
So the president and the defense secretary didn't ask for extra money, but the Democrat-controlled Congress is forcing them to accept it.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And that's, I mean, what kind of world would we be in where this was the case, that after 20 years of this so-called war on terrorism, now you've got Congress on board with looking at the next front, because they're wanting to take that additional money and spend it on new aircrafts and new materials. And it really should make the American people wonder, which far too many of them don't actually hear about it, but it should make them wonder what in the world their Congress is doing when they're sitting here dealing with natural disasters, dealing with their infrastructure falling apart. And yet all of these elected politicians are just sitting in Washington saying, hey, you know who needs more money? The military.
I know who needs more money. Hunter Biden. I saw the president of the Ukraine sitting with Joe Biden. Joe was asleep, of course, as is his wont when visiting statesmen come calling. Actually, maybe he had the right idea with the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Ukraine. Perhaps sleeping through what they have to say isn't a bad idea. But the President of the Ukraine seemed very familiar with the Biden family, familiar enough to tweet a list of financial demands. Are they going to be met? Is the American taxpayer going to throw still more money into the Ukraine? And how much of it comes back to the Biden family and other bloodsuckers?
You know, it is more likely than not that those demands are not only going to be met, but that the American people aren't even going to have any idea about it, because that's kind of what brings the media coverage into all of it, what they choose to cover and what they choose not to cover. And when it comes to someone like Hunter Biden, when it comes to the Biden family, that's not a topic the media really wants to touch on, because they don't want to get themselves into another one of those, you know, Hillary Clinton laptop hyperloops where they're talking about it over and over again. And I think for the Biden family, they're lucky in the sense that Ukraine is kind of one of those close U.S. allies that Congress is going to continue to help out, continue to pour money into no matter what. You know, when it comes to a new military aid package for, say, $60 million, they're all about that. They're good with that. And that's something that works in their favor. And I think when it comes to, you know, the media coverage of all of this, now that they're looking at Donald Trump most likely definitely making a run in 2024, then they have to kind of soften the blow when it comes to any possible criticism of Joe Biden, of his family, because they're looking at another race between the two of them and wondering if it's possible if Biden is actually going to lose to Trump instead of it being the other way around.
Trust me, Biden won't be the candidate in 24. I don't want to be unpleasant, but you wouldn't send him out to buy a loaf. Never mind let him run again in 2.5 years from now. Somebody else that's not needing money is Rachel Maddow. She of the takes onion from pocket, takes handkerchief from other pocket, dabs one's eyes. She's always breaking into tears at Donald Trump, at the withdrawal from Afghanistan and so on. She's just got a bumper new contract. Eat your heart out, Rachel. $30 million a year for reading the news.
That is crazy. I mean, that, especially when you have to remember that Rachel Maddow is the same person who sat there and told the world that Russia was going to attack our power grid in the dead of winter and that millions of Americans were going to freeze. She sat there and put that out there as an actual warning. They allowed that to run on the airwaves, and then now she's getting rewarded with an even new, even bigger contract than ever before. And I think part of what's so crazy about it is you think about the fact that, you know, here in the United States, they'll run these polls every single year where they talk about how many Americans trust the media as a whole. And every single year they keep getting lower and lower. And this is Democrats and Republicans both saying they do not trust the media. They do not trust these networks like the one that Rachel Maddow represents. And yet they have no problem handing her $30 million. I mean, that something doesn't compute there. That should make the American people start wondering how it's possible that at a time when their trust isn't in these mainstream networks, they continue to be so incredibly profitable.
As our colleague Lee Camp pointed out, this business could be summarized thus. Media houses worth $10 billion pay $10 million, in Rachel's case, much more than that, to television hosts to convince people on $100,000 that the people on $10,000 are the problem. I thought that brilliantly summed up the American media scene, and indeed, to a great extent, the British media scene. But the good news is people are switching off and switching over, aren't they? CNN's on the floor, CNNBC is on the floor. The future's not great for these platforms.
You would hope so. And I think that especially as we see, for those of us where, you know, we continue to build our presence on social media, because social media has been the biggest thing that has worked in our favor of people actually being able to turn off the TV, to get on YouTube, to watch live streams, to get on Twitter, to see what's actually happening instead of just what all of these talking heads tell them is happening. And I think that that's why there is such a push, not only for all of our voices to be allowed on social media, but for it to stop restricting those voices, because that's when people are actually able to see what's out there. And it presents this incredibly important narrative shift, especially at a time when, you know, we're watching Congress want to increase the defense budget. Well, there's a good chance that they're going to start pushing for, if not a new war, then some new kind of bombing, you know, like in Afghanistan, whenever the Biden administration was the one standing there saying, hey, we bombed Afghanistan. It was super successful. We took out what they referred to as an ISIS-K facilitator. Yet you get on social media and then you actually get to see real people talking, questioning why 10 civilians were killed, including 6 children, questioning not only why they were taken out, but why the Biden administration was so quick to just shrug it off and say, oh, yeah, we got a member of ISIS-K. That would not have happened if you didn't allow that discourse. And in other times, people would just have to rely on what was said on TV or printed on the newspaper, and they would just shrug it off and say, oh, well, clearly the United States is going after terrorists, when that's not always the case.
Well, with all respect to all other forms of media, plays and books and radio for that matter, film is the most important of the media. And on your social media output, you make brilliant use of video. It's fine, I do it all the time, writing pungent or even purple prose, and it goes so far. But video, film, goes far further, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate that. I think that that is one of those cases where it, you know, in the media industry, they always joke and they say, well, if it bleeds, it leads, which is to say that the audience wants to see something. They want to actually see something that provokes some sort of emotion in them. And all too often, you know, if you turn on the TV, what you're seeing is something that is going to lead to more and more fear. They want to stoke the fear. They want to stoke the divide among the public so that they will keep tuning in. But I think the power of social media and the power of what we're able to put out there is to remind people that it's okay to have a conversation. It's okay to question the narrative that's being put out there. And in fact, it should be, they should want to question that narrative, and they should want to actually see the on the ground footage. And, you know, I really hope that this continues to create a movement that goes on far longer than you and I are around to be able to talk about.
Well, you'll be around for a long time, by the grace of God. Follow Rachel Blevins, if you're not already, on Twitter and online. Rachel, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.